Nobody told you the truth about where you actually come from. Not your history books, not your textbooks, not the stories passed down through generations at dinner tables and temple steps. The version of Indian origins that most people carry in their heads, that neat, clean, politically convenient story, was never the complete picture. And now in laboratories that smell of ancient bone dust and digital data, scientists have cracked open something that changes everything. What ancient DNA is revealing about the origins of the people of the Indian subcontinent is not just surprising, it is seismic. There's a woman buried in the soil of Rakhigarhi, a village in the Haryana state of northern India. She died approximately 4,500 years ago. She never knew her name would one day echo through international scientific journals, spark political controversy, and force the entire world to reconsider what it means to be Indian. For years, her skeleton lay undisturbed beneath layers of earth that had once been the beating heart of one of humanity's greatest civilizations, the Indus Valley Civilization, a Bronze Age empire that stretched across what is now Pakistan and northwestern India, housing more than 5 million people at its peak. She was excavated, her bones were analyzed, and what researchers found inside her DNA shattered a story that millions of people had been told and had believed for decades. But here is where it gets complicated, because the story that was shattered was not just a scientific one, it was a political one, a nationalist one, a story about identity, power, and whose ancestors built what. And when science collides with identity, the explosion is rarely quiet. The Indian government launched a groundbreaking study to reconstruct the population history of South Asia using ancient and modern genomics, a move specifically aimed at resolving long-standing, deeply contentious debates about the origins of Indian communities. Conducted by the Anthropological Survey of India under the Ministry of Culture, the project set out to analyze 300 ancient skeletal remains from archaeological sites across India and Pakistan, including the most iconic Indus Valley sites of Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Burzaham, and Lothal. Think about the scale of that ambition. 300 skeletons, thousands of years of silence, and scientists with the technology to finally make those bones speak. What most people are not seeing is that this is not simply an academic exercise. This is a scientific reckoning that has been building for more than a century, one that is now colliding head-on with one of the most emotionally and politically charged questions in South Asian history. Who are the Indians, really? Where did they come from? And did the people who built one of the ancient world's most sophisticated urban civilizations descend from within? Or did they arrive from somewhere else? To understand why the answer matters so deeply, you have to go back, not just centuries, but millennia. You have to go back to a time when the Indian subcontinent was not a nation, not a civilization, but a landscape occupied by some of the earliest humans to walk out of Africa and push eastward into the unknown. The UC Berkeley research team found that most of the genetic variation in India can be explained by a single migration of humans out of Africa approximately 50,000 years ago. These early populations then interbred with now extinct relatives, Neanderthals and Denisovans, adding ancient, archaic layers to what would eventually become the Indian genome. Read that again, 50,000 years, before agriculture, before cities, before language as we understand it, before religion, caste, or kingdom. The ancestors of the people living on the Indian subcontinent today were already there, hunting, surviving, adapting, in a world that most modern humans cannot even begin to imagine. And this is where the science gets extraordinary. One of the most striking and unexpected findings of the latest research was that India harbors the highest variation in Neanderthal ancestry among all non-African populations on Earth. This allowed scientists to reconstruct approximately 50% of the Neanderthal genome and 20% of the Denisovan genome from Indian individuals, more than any other archaic ancestry study ever conducted. Let that sink in for a moment. The people of India are not just carrying the genetic memories of ancient farmers and steppe warriors. They are carrying fragments of species that went extinct more than 40,000 years ago. India, in a very real and scientifically verifiable sense, is the world's greatest living archive of human prehistory. But the ancient hunter-gatherers who first populated the subcontinent, known in scientific literature as Ancient Ancestral South Indians, or AASI, were only the beginning of the story, because history, as it always does, brought waves. And those waves did not come quietly. Previous research has shown that most Indians derive ancestry from 3 ancestral groups: descendants of ancient Iranian farmers who arrived on the Indian subcontinent sometime between 4,700 and 3,000 BCE, herders from the Eurasian steppe region who moved into India between 900 and 2500 BCE, and indigenous South Asian hunter-gatherers who had been there far longer than either of the other 2 groups. 3 populations, 3 distinct worlds, 3 different timelines converging on the same piece of land. And from that convergence, from that genetic collision, emerged one of the most diverse, complex, and layered human populations on the planet. Now think about what that means for the story you were told in school. The version of Indian origins that most people learned was simple, almost too simple. It was a story with clean edges and clear heroes. Indigenous people built a great civilization in the Indus Valley. Migrants came from outside. Culture spread, languages evolved, castes formed, kingdoms rose. That version was tidy. It fit neatly into textbooks. It could be summarized in a paragraph. But ancient DNA does not care about textbooks. Ancient DNA does not respect political convenience. And what it is revealing about the Indian subcontinent is anything but simple. The first layer of this revelation centers on the Indus Valley Civilization itself, that extraordinary urban experiment that flourished between roughly 3300 BCE and 1300 BCE across what is now Pakistan and northwestern India. At its height, the Indus Valley Civilization was the largest of the ancient world's three great civilizations, larger in geographic spread than either ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia. Its cities had advanced sewage systems, grid-planned streets, standardized weights and measures, evidence of long-distance trade reaching as far as Mesopotamia and Central Asia. And then, for reasons that still provoke fierce debate among archaeologists, it declined. Its great cities were slowly abandoned, its people dispersed, and its writing system, the Indus script, has never been deciphered. But here's where it gets worse, or rather, more complicated. An ancient genome recovered from an Indus Valley Civilization individual fits as a mixture of people related to ancient Iranians, the largest component, and Southeast Asian hunter-gatherers, a unique genetic profile that matched ancient DNA from 11 other genetic outliers found at sites in Iran and Turkmenistan that were in cultural communication with the IVC. Critically, these individuals had little, if any, steppe pastoralist-derived ancestry, showing that such ancestry was not present in Northwest South Asia during the IVC, even though it is widespread there today. This is a finding with enormous implications. The people who built Mohenjo-Daro, the people who engineered the world's first urban sewage systems, the people who created standardized weights and traded with ancient Mesopotamia. They were not the same people, genetically, as the North Indians of today. Something changed. Someone arrived. And the question of who that someone was has become the most politically explosive issue in the history of Indian genetics. The debate centers on a term that carries enormous historical weight: the Aryan migration theory. In the 19th century, European colonial scholars proposed that a group of people they called Aryans, light-skinned, Sanskrit-speaking, chariot-riding pastoralists, migrated from somewhere in Central Asia or Eastern Europe into the Indian subcontinent, bringing with them the Indo-European language family, Vedic religion, and the social structures that eventually crystallized into the caste system. This theory was used, and grotesquely abused, by colonial powers to paint a picture of Indian civilization as fundamentally derivative, as a gift from outside rather than an indigenous achievement. Later, Adolf Hitler distorted the concept even further into something monstrous, stripping it of any academic legitimacy in the eyes of many. This is why the debate never really ended. It could not, because it was never purely about science. Many Hindu nationalists downplay or reject the steppe migration scenario, in part because of its lingering association with colonial narratives about a race of fair-skinned Aryans conquering the region. Instead, they argue for a reverse sequence, that Aryans were indigenous to India and eventually carried their language and culture outward to Central Asia and Europe. This counter-narrative, known as the out-of-India theory, has gained enormous political traction in recent decades, particularly in India, where it aligns with the nationalist worldview that insists Indian civilization is entirely self-generated, eternally rooted, and requires no external explanation. But the science does not support that view, and this is where everything changes. Ancient DNA from the Swat Valley in Pakistan shows that steppe ancestry first appears in South Asian burials only after approximately 1200 BCE, well after the decline of the Indus Valley Civilization. The genetic evidence supports a model where the IVC flourished under a non-Indo-European speaking population, and Indo-Aryan language and culture arrived later with steppe-descended migrants. This is not a small finding. This is the genetic equivalent of a tectonic shift. The people who built the Indus Valley Civilization did not speak Sanskrit. They did not compose the Vedas. They did not ride horses across the plains of Central Asia. They were a completely different population, genetically distinct from the steppe pastoralists who came later and whose descendants make up a significant portion of modern North Indians today. According to the evidence now accumulated from multiple independent studies, the steppe migrants, the people who carried what scientists call R1A-Z93, the Y chromosome marker found in modern South Asian populations, arrived in waves after the Indus Valley Civilization had already begun its decline. Ancient DNA from the Santashta culture, dating to 2100 and 1800 BCE in what is now Russia and Kazakhstan, and the related Andronovo horizon, reveals that these steppe populations carried a specific genetic profile, a mixture of Yamnaya steppe ancestry from Eastern European hunter-gatherers and Caucasus hunter-gatherers, plus European farmer ancestry. The Santashta culture is notably associated with early spoke-wheeled chariots, horse domestication, and fire rituals that have striking parallels with Vedic texts. The chariots buried in Sonauli, Uttar Pradesh, the same chariots that Indian archaeologists have celebrated as evidence of indigenous warrior culture, appear, according to genomic evidence, to be part of a technological and cultural package that arrived from the northwest, not one that originated within the subcontinent. And this is where the political stakes become impossibly high. In 2019, many Indian journalists reported that a study of ancient DNA from a 4,500-year-old skeleton of a woman who lived in the Indus Valley proved there had been no Aryan migration, because she carried no steppe ancestry. In fact, the study only supported other evidence that the steppe migration occurred later. In April, however, India's government tweaked a widely used grade 12 history textbook to present the study as undermining the steppe migration scenario. Read that carefully. A scientific finding was being repackaged, rerouted, and deployed as political ammunition. The woman from Rakhigarhi, whose bones had spoken a precise genetic language to researchers, was being translated into a different message, one that confirmed a pre-existing ideology rather than following the evidence wherever it led. A leading population geneticist put it bluntly, "Scientists are not confused, politicians are." But science does not stop because politicians are uncomfortable. And the latest research has made the picture not simpler but far more layered. And in that complexity lies something genuinely astonishing. In a study published in the journal Cell, researchers analyzed genomic data from more than 2,700 people from across India, capturing genetic variation from most geographic regions, linguistic groups, and communities. They found that most modern-day Indians carry ancestry traceable to three ancestral groups: Neolithic Iranian farmers, Eurasian steppe pastoralists, and South Asian hunter-gatherers. According to senior author Priya Morjani of the University of California, Berkeley, this study fills a critical gap and reshapes understanding of how ancient migrations, archaic admixture, and social structures have shaped Indian genetic variation. This is the most comprehensive genomic analysis of Indian populations ever conducted. And what it reveals is not a simple story of conquest or migration. It is a story of convergence, of three great rivers of human ancestry flowing together across thousands of years to create something entirely unique. The ancient ancestral South Indians, the first wave, the original inhabitants, are most strongly represented in South India today. South Indian populations retain the highest proportions of IVC-like ancestry, between 70 and 90%, while North Indian populations have somewhat lower proportions, ranging from 45 to 70%, due to the additional steppe ancestry from later migrations. This genetic gradient, running from south to north from older to newer ancestry, is not random. It maps almost perfectly onto linguistic geography. The Dravidian languages of South India, spoken by hundreds of millions of people, carry the genetic signature of the Indus Valley people. The Indo-Aryan languages of the north carry the signature of the steppe. Think about what that means. Every time a Tamil speaker recites ancient poetry, every time a Telugu student opens a grammar book, every time a Kannada song plays on a radio in Chennai, there is a genetic memory encoded in the speakers of those languages that stretches back not just to the Indus Valley, but potentially even further, to the first farmers, to the first hunter-gatherers, to people who crossed into the subcontinent when woolly mammoths still walked the earth. But the story does not stop at migration. It deepens into something even more unexpected. In modeling how ancient DNA from Iranian-related groups could have given rise to the genomic sequences of present-day Indians, researchers found that the most likely scenario was an influx of farmers from Sarazm, an ancient agricultural hub in what is today Tajikistan. Archaeological studies have previously pointed to trade connections between Sarazm and South Asia, but it was not a one-way link. Researchers found one individual among the ancient Iranian ancestors who carried traces of Indian genetics too. This is not invasion, this is not conquest. This is what real human history looks like, messy, bidirectional, woven together through trade routes and marriages and movements that no political narrative can fully contain. As one archaeologist not involved in the research noted, societies were far more connected in deep time than most have ever given them credit for. And here is what makes this even more extraordinary. A research paper published in the European Journal of Human Genetics in October 2025 may have widened the scope of research into South Asia's population history even further. According to researcher Ranajit Das, the genetic landscape of ancient India was likely multi-layered and more complex than previously assumed, and further ancient DNA sampling may reveal additional deep ancestries not yet identified. In other words, the three-source model, as powerful and well-evidenced as it is, may itself be incomplete. There may be populations, migrations, and genetic contributions that science has not yet discovered, because the ancient DNA record from the Indian subcontinent remains frustratingly sparse. The woman from Rakhigarhi is still, as of today, one of the very few ancient Indian genomes ever successfully extracted and sequenced. The rest of the story is being reconstructed from fragments, proxies, and modern genomes working backward through time. What most people are not seeing is that this sparsity is itself a scientific emergency. India is home to the world's second largest human population. Its genetic diversity is staggering, with around 5,000 different ethno-linguistic and religious groups. India is one of the most culturally and genetically diverse countries in the world, yet it remains significantly underrepresented in genomic surveys, even when compared to other non-European groups such as East Asians and Africans. A civilization of this scale, this antiquity, this complexity, and the global scientific community has been reading its genetic history through a keyhole. That is beginning to change, but not without resistance. The political sensitivity surrounding ancient Indian DNA is unlike almost anything else in the field of archaeogenetics. Most of the skeletal remains being analyzed in India's government-backed genomics project come from excavations carried out from the 1920s to the late 1950s at Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, and other ancient settlements of the Indus Valley. By comparing ancient DNA extracted from bones with DNA sequences from modern people, researchers hope to generate insights on the history of Indian populations, as well as information on diets, living environments, and disease. This is science serving history. But history, in this case, is not neutral. Every answer that emerges from those ancient bones lands in a political minefield. Consider what is actually at stake in this debate. If the steppe migration theory is correct, and the cumulative weight of genetic evidence strongly suggests it is, then some of the most sacred aspects of Hindu religious and cultural identity, including Sanskrit, the Vedas, and the ritual systems they describe, arrived in India from outside, not as conquest in the Hollywood sense, but as migration, integration, and cultural synthesis over centuries. That is a profoundly different story from the one many nationalists want to tell. It does not diminish the achievement, it does not make these traditions less Indian, but it does complicate the claim of absolute, unbroken indigenous origin. And this is not chaos. This is actually just history. This is what happens to every civilization in every corner of the world. There's no population on Earth that did not arrive somewhere from somewhere else at some point in time. The question has never been whether migrations happened. The question is what they mean and who gets to decide. A science paper on ancient Indian genetics concludes that there was an asymmetric social interaction between descendants of steppe pastoralists and peoples of the Indus Valley. In simpler terms, this means the encounter between the steppe pastoralists and the people of the Indus Valley Civilization cannot have been entirely friendly. Much of the steppe ancestry found in modern North Indians is male-dominated, meaning steppe migrant men were more successful at reproducing with local women than local men were. This pattern of male-biased steppe ancestry is consistent with what researchers found when steppe populations expanded into Europe as well. This is not a comfortable finding. It suggests that whatever the nature of the steppe migration into South Asia, whether it came in small waves over centuries or in larger, more disruptive movements, it was accompanied by significant social upheaval. The Indus Valley people did not simply welcome newcomers and blend peacefully. The genetic record suggests something more complicated, more contested, more human. And then, layered over all of this, comes the finding that reshapes even the scientific understanding of our species as a whole. Researchers found that almost 90% of all known Neanderthal genes found in modern humans today were detected in the genomes studied among Indians. It is not fully known whether Neanderthals and Denisovans actually lived in South Asia, or whether their genes were carried to India by modern humans after encounters with Neanderthals and Denisovans in Eurasia. 90% of all known Neanderthal genetic material preserved in modern humanity, found in the genomes of people living in India today. This means that studying Indian DNA is not just about understanding Indian history. It is about understanding the entire story of Homo sapiens. India is, in a very real sense, the world's greatest living genetic archive. And for most of the history of modern genomics, scientists barely looked at it. The most comprehensive study to date, the UC Berkeley Cell paper published in June 2025, represents a turning point. A team of scientists led by the University of California, Berkeley, completed the most comprehensive genomic analysis of Indian populations ever conducted. Their findings reveal a complex 50,000-year history of genetic mixing, migration, and population shifts that continue to shape health and disease patterns across the Indian subcontinent. This is critical. The implications of this research are not just historical, they are medical. The same genetic complexity that makes Indian ancestry so fascinating, those strong bottlenecks, those multiple mixture events, that extraordinary diversity, also creates specific vulnerabilities to disease. Understanding where Indians come from is not just a question for historians, it is a question for doctors, for pharmacologists, for anyone developing therapies that need to work across the full spectrum of human genetic variation. Because of the complex history of South Asians, multiple mixture events over the past 10,000 years, followed by strong bottlenecks in many groups, the result is a very complex mosaic of different ancestries, such that the variation in archaic ancestry among Indians is higher than anywhere else in the world. This mosaic is not a problem to be solved. It is, according to those who understand it, one of the most remarkable genetic legacies in human history, a population that carries within it the genetic memories of Neanderthals, Denisovans, African hunter-gatherers, Central Asian farmers, Eurasian steppe warriors, and indigenous South Asian forest peoples, all layered together across 50 millennia of encounter, survival, and adaptation. And yet, for all the science that has now accumulated, for all the papers, the genomes, the ancient bones that have been coaxed into giving up their secrets, the story is not finished. Initial findings from India's government-backed genomic study suggest a continuity in the genetic makeup of ancient and modern populations in India, without significant genetic changes, a finding that, if confirmed, could challenge prevailing theories about external migrations shaping Indian civilization. This is the wild card in an already complex equation, because if further analysis of those 300 skeletal remains from Harappan sites confirms genetic continuity, if it shows that the people of the Indus Valley were directly ancestral to modern Indians without a major external influx, it would force a revision of conclusions that the field currently considers well established. The real story, the one that most mainstream coverage is missing, is that this is not a finished debate with a clear winner. It is a living, evolving, fiercely contested scientific frontier. And the people caught in the middle of it are not just geneticists and archaeologists. They are ordinary Indians, more than 1 billion of them, whose identity, whose sense of belonging, whose understanding of who they are and where they came from is bound up in questions that laboratories are only now beginning to answer. The Indian genetic cline, the spectrum along which Indian populations arrange themselves, has previously been shown to reflect varying proportions of ancestry from 2 broad ancestral groups: the ancestral North Indians, who harbor large proportions of ancestry related to West Eurasians, and the ancestral South Indians, who are only distantly related to West Eurasians. Recent ancient DNA analysis has shown that indigenous South Asians related to Andamanese hunter-gatherers mixed with ancient Iranian farmers to form the ancestral South Indian group, who in turn mixed with ancient Eurasian steppe pastoralist-related groups to form the ancestral North Indians. 2 great ancestral pools, each of which is itself a mixture of earlier populations, each of which carries within it the genetic echoes of migrations and encounters that predate recorded history by thousands of years. And every single person alive in India today sits somewhere on that spectrum, carrying in their cells a proportion of each of those ancient worlds. This is what makes the politics so painful, because the science is telling a story that is actually more magnificent than any nationalist myth. It is saying that the people of the Indian subcontinent are not the product of a single origin, a single people, a single moment of creation. They are the product of the entire world's ancient migrations, converging on one extraordinary piece of land. They carry Africa. They carry the Iranian plateau. They carry the Central Asian steppe. They carry the Andaman Islands. They carry Neanderthal valleys and Denisovan mountain caves that modern humans never saw with their own eyes. They carry all of this simultaneously in every cell of their bodies, without contradiction. And yet, as the Indian government's own sponsored study moves toward its conclusions that were expected by the end of 2025 but have not yet been fully released, scientists involved admit there are still gaps in the timeline that need to be filled. And for instance, very little is known about the people who cultivated rice along the Ganges River thousands of years ago. The Gangetic Civilization, the world's other great ancient urban heartland, the one that gave rise to early Hinduism, Buddhism, and the great empires of the classical Indian world, remains, genetically speaking, almost entirely unexplored. Who were those rice farmers? Where did they come from? Were they related to the Indus Valley people, to the steppe migrants, to a completely different population that science has not yet even classified? These are not small questions. They are questions about the foundations of everything that came after: the Maurya Empire, the Gupta Golden Age, the medieval kingdoms, the Mughal synthesis, the colonial encounter, and ultimately the modern nation-state that 1.4 billion people call home today. What the ancient DNA revolution is doing, slowly, bone by bone, genome by genome, is not destroying Indian identity. It is expanding it. It is revealing that the origins of the people of the subcontinent are not a single story, but an anthology. Not a clean lineage, but a web. Not a nation that arrived fully formed from one source, but a civilization that was built, layer by layer, from the contributions of peoples who came from across the ancient world and made something entirely new. But the political system has not caught up with the science, and the science has not yet delivered its final verdict. The bones from Harappa are still being processed. The ancient DNA from the Ganges Valley has barely been touched. The full picture of what happened between the decline of the Indus Valley Civilization and the rise of the Vedic world remains, despite everything that has been discovered, frustratingly incomplete. And this is where the story leaves you, not with an answer, but with a larger question than the one you started with. If the Indus Valley people were genetically distinct from the Vedic people, if the steppe migrants brought language but mixed with a civilization already centuries old, if the indigenous hunter-gatherers who were there first, the Asi, the ancient ancestors of South India, were themselves the product of a 50,000-year journey from Africa through lands we can barely map. If all of this is true, then what exactly is the original Indian? What does it mean to claim this land as ancestral? What does it mean to build a national identity around origins that science is showing were never singular, never simple, never what anyone thought they were? The woman from Rakhigarhi cannot answer these questions. She has already given science everything she had. The answers will come, or will not come, from the laboratories still running their analyses, from the ancient bones still waiting to be sampled, from the genomes of 1.4 billion living people still carrying their secrets in every cell. What is certain, right now in the middle of 2026, is this. The story of where Indians came from is not over. It is barely beginning. And whatever answers emerge from the ancient DNA, whatever they confirm or overturn, whatever they vindicate or complicate, they will not belong to any political party, any nationalist movement, or any ideological framework. They will belong to science, and through science, to everyone. Something much bigger is still coming out of those bones, and when it does, it will not be simple. It never was,